Please be seated. I hope you don't mind this morning. I'm going to let a nerdy part of myself out. Share with you today. Take you on a little journey through art, philosophy, science, and then theology. It's fairly easy, when you think about it, to put ourselves in this disciple who I like to refer to as the marveling man, who's marveling at these great stones and how this temple is built, and telling Jesus, look at that, these wonderful stones, this wonderful structure. It's easy to put ourselves in that position. We've marveled at things. Maybe it was Stonehenge. Maybe it's the mysterious figures of Easter Island. Maybe it's Mount Rushmore. Maybe it's some skyscraper of some sort. This passage made me think of art at LACMA in LA, an installation by Michael Heiser. Maybe you've seen it. It's called Levitated Mass. And if you haven't seen the documentary on Levitated Mass, I commend it to you. It's unbelievable. So this vision that Heiser had was to install a 340-ton boulder at the museum. And to accomplish this, they had to create a tractor truck that could handle that kind of load, and also the street patterns that it would be driving through to get it from Riverside to LA. They spent $10 million doing that. The tractor trailer is the length of a football field, and it traveled a 106-mile journey to get this huge rock in place. And then they spent a fortune pouring a foundation for this art installation so that you could see this somewhat levitated 340-ton rock, and you could walk underneath it. And so the documentary is something to behold, because you get every opinion in the world coming out in this documentary about art or about spending money that way. Some people think it was glorious, but I love the reaction of the Pentecostal church that was on the route of this great boulder along the way, and the truck broke down right in front of this church called Church of the Rock. It's worth seeing the documentary just to see what their interpretation of that meant. But we marvel at these things that we think are somewhat permanent. Heiser would not talk about the meaning of this art that he created, but he did mention that it was built to last 3,500 years. We'll see. Not me, but someone will see. The large stones the disciple is marveling at made him wonder, how is this possible? Who could even build such a thing? It's amazing. And Jesus' response to the marveling man is quite abrupt. Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down. Well, art was never meant to be a permanent expression. It should be an evolution. I've heard many artists talk about how they're art points to something. It's not the art in and of itself. And it makes me think of a philosophy professor I had. I was fortunate enough to have spent some time with Charles Hartshorne, one of the great philosophers in our country years ago, who was a student of Alfred North Whitehead, who I've mentioned before. Both of them embraced this concept called the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. And it's a pretty simple concept. It's that when you start to make something concrete that really isn't, when you take something that's subjective and you make it into an objective truth, you are making a huge mistake. A huge mistake. Making something concrete makes it heavy, unmovable, and inflexible. Making a subjective energy into an objective truth destroys wonder, exploration, and growth. It also destroys the scientific process. So on to science. Thomas Kuhn, who taught at MIT for years, wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And in that book, he pointed out that science also is vulnerable to this misplaced concreteness. Come up with a theory, and you sort of attach research to it. Sometimes it over-influences the research you do, but ultimately that theory will wear out, and then a new theory will emerge. But in that process, there's a lot of tension, a lot of rethinking, a lot of fear of moving into some other theory. He used the example of phlogiston, which I've always loved. Phlogiston was a substance that was projected to solve this issue of why combustible materials burn, and then where does it go? What happens to the log? I mean, you have something that weighs a lot, and then it's just gone. Where did all that mass go? Doesn't that keep you up at night? And so it was projected that phlogiston was the solution to this. Well, eventually that theory broke down, but there was a lot of, again, tension and argumentation about that theory passing away. And it led to the discovery of oxygen and oxygenation. And it opened up a whole new way of seeing and experiencing the world. And I don't know about you, but I'm grateful for oxygen. And it was nice to have discovered it along the way. And what about theology? Have we misplaced concreteness? When we do that, it can hurt art. It certainly can threaten the scientific process. It can also destroy faith. Creeds, prayers, liturgies, they should be seen more as stepping stones to something else. If we have not seen them that way, we have wrongly poured concrete around them, suffocating them, taking away their real power as a pathway, as a pointer to something more, something better. And if we find ourselves saying, that should never, absolutely never change, we have to ask ourselves, have we fallen into the fallacy of misplaced concreteness? I wish that phrase was in the Bible. It saddens me that when I hear from colleagues who are working on the liturgical evolution of the prayer book, that they say that the Nicene Creed is the third rail. Don't change it. Don't talk about changing it. Don't evolve it. If you do, you will be burned alive in the liturgical world and discussion. You will be cast out into utter darkness. That's misplaced concreteness. So we build these ideas, these scientific theories. We try to artistically express truths. We try to approach life with some philosophical sophistication, but they are all in flux, because that is the world we live in. So the question is, well, then where do you turn for solace? The marveling man turned to the stones. Amazing. There's something permanent. Thank God for permanence, right? But I love what Hinduism teaches. Suffering is understood as seeing that which is impermanent as permanent. Interesting. Imagine all of our suffering because we think what we are in right now, what we are going through right now, the problems we are facing are permanent. Historically, they might be a blip on the screen. So the great rocks of democracy, the stones of the Constitution, the stories, our history, which seems to be crumbling, the narratives of our history, especially around racial reconciliation, the reckoning that's going on, the environmental issues that we're facing, global warming. We feel the world is crumbling around us. And Jesus, maybe this isn't the word, but Jesus seems comfortable with deconstructionism. He feels comfortable with crumbling realities because he sees beyond it, that which we're facing is not permanent. There's a deeper permanence in God's love, God's guidance, and all that goes with that. So, as a faith community, in a time of impermanence, the last thing the world needs is for us to get more permanent about things that aren't permanent. The church needs to model. We need to model a kind of openness and vulnerability that can lead us into new revelation, new experiences, a new openness to reinterpreting what both our personal lives and our communal lives mean and what they can be in the world we live in now. We must embrace a willingness to change and not freak out, but to go deeper into the truths of our faith in a God who loves us and walks with us through the rocky terrain. And maybe it's rocky because we need to take God's hand to help us. Maybe that is the point, that we actually have to start relying not on the things we think are permanent, the things that we build up, but the things God is building up. So I invite you during the meditation to ask yourself, where are things making you suffer in your life because you fear that they are permanent. You fear that these things will not pass or improve or be transformed. To use the time to let go, to invite the permanence of God's promise to be with us in all things, and to find the peace you need to protect yourself today and in the weeks ahead.